Narrator, Stories from the Dark presents a journey into the shadows where truth blurs with imagination. I'm your host, and you're listening to Beneath the Surface, where we explore cases that challenge our understanding of human nature and the darkness that sometimes lies beneath ordinary lives. What you're about to hear contains mature themes and detailed descriptions of criminal investigations. Listener discretion is advised. Tonight, we dive into the darkness. Narrator, Riverstone Memorial Hospital, Westlake County, 1998. Once the pride of this Midwestern community, the 8-story medical facility had served the region for over 6 decades before financial troubles forced its closure. By the late 90s, it stood abandoned on the outskirts of town, a hollow shell of its former self, awaiting demolition. On October 17, 1998, a Saturday evening, 3 college students, Trent Wilson, Amber Reeves, and Daniel Chun, entered the abandoned hospital on a dare. Armed with flashlights, a video camera, and the invincibility of youth, they planned to spend 2 hours exploring the decaying building, filming their adventure for a student documentary about abandoned places. None of them would emerge until the following morning, and when they did, their lives would be forever changed by what they encountered on what became known as the Forgotten Floor. Jason Winters. I remember when this story first broke. I was a journalism student at the time, and it immediately caught my attention, 3 students entering an abandoned hospital and emerging with a wild story that nobody believed. The footage they captured became something of an urban legend in early internet circles, but the full tape was never made public. Only select portions were ever shown during the subsequent investigation, and even those have been difficult to find in the decades since. Narrator. The 3 students had chosen Riverstone Memorial for their project after learning that the hospital was scheduled for demolition the following month. They entered through an unsecured basement entrance around 8:15 p.m., according to the timestamp on their video footage. Officer Martin Ramirez. The call came in around 6:30 Sunday morning. A truck driver passing by the old hospital reported seeing 3 young people stumbling out of the building, looking disoriented. When we arrived, we found them sitting on the curb outside. They were dehydrated, exhausted, and in a state of significant psychological distress. Initially, we suspected drug use, but toxicology reports later ruled that out. There was something else going on with these kids. Something had scared them badly. Narrator. The students were transported to County General Hospital, where they were treated for minor injuries, cuts, and bruises consistent with navigating through a hazardous environment and mild dehydration. All 3 were also showing signs of acute stress response. Dr. Eleanor Kemp. What struck me most was their consistent story. In cases of group hallucination or shared delusion, you typically see variations in individual accounts. But these 3 described the same experience with remarkable consistency, down to specific details. They were terrified, and not in the way people who've just done something illegal and got caught are scared. This was raw fear, the kind I've seen in patients who've survived serious trauma. Narrator. According to statements given to the police once they had sufficiently recovered, the students had spent approximately 2 hours exploring the first 4 floors of the hospital without incident. They filmed empty corridors, abandoned patient rooms, and medical equipment left behind during the hasty closure. Their footage from this portion of the night appears normal. 3 college students alternately spooked and amused by their forbidden exploration. However, around 10:30 p.m., they made a discovery that would alter the course of their night and their lives. Trent Wilson. We thought we knew the layout of the building from research we'd done beforehand. Riverstone was supposed to have 7 floors, the main level plus 6 patient floors. But when we reached the stairwell after exploring the 4th floor, we noticed something weird. There was a floor marked on the stairwell that didn't match our information. Between the 4th and 5th floors, there was a door labeled S. Just the letter S. Amber Reeves, the door to floor S was different from the others. It was painted a dull red rather than the institutional green of the other floors. I remember joking that the S must stand for scary or spooky. We debated whether to check it out, but ultimately, that was the whole point of our project, to explore. Narrator. What the students found beyond that red door would become the subject of intense debate multiple investigations, and eventually legal action. Their video footage, which runs for approximately 72 minutes after they enter the S floor, has been analyzed by numerous experts with widely varying conclusions. Detective Sarah Morgan, when we first viewed the footage, it was puzzling. The quality degraded significantly after they entered this floor they called S. There was interference, static, portions where the audio cut out completely. From an investigative standpoint, it was frustrating because it made it difficult to verify their claims. But the degradation itself was interesting. The camera had functioned perfectly on all other floors. Narrator: the footage, while imperfect, shows the students entering a floor that appears significantly different from the others they had explored. While the rest of the hospital had been largely emptied of equipment, Floor S appeared to be in a state of suspended animation, as if operations had ceased midday. Daniel Chen, it looked like everyone had just vanished in the middle of their work. There were papers on desks, half-empty coffee cups, personal items like photos and desk toys. But what was really strange was that everything looked dated, not like the late 90s when the hospital closed, but older. The computers were ancient, those huge beige monitors. The telephones were rotary. There was a calendar on one wall showing March 1976. Narrator: as the students moved deeper into the floor, their footage captures several unusual elements. Unlike the institutional layout of the other floors, with their wide corridors and rooms branching off to either side, Floor S had a labyrinthine design. Hallways curved and intersected at odd angles. Room numbers followed no apparent logical sequence. Dr. James Norris: I've studied the original blueprints for Riverstone Memorial, and there is absolutely no indication of any floor designated as S or any intermediate level between 4 and 5. Furthermore, the layout described by the students and partially visible in their footage doesn't conform to hospital design principles of any era, particularly the 1970s when they claim this floor was last active. The described layout would be highly inefficient for patient care or staff movement. Narrator: approximately 20 minutes into their exploration of Floor S, the students' footage captures what would become the most controversial aspect of their experience. Trent Wilson: we entered what looked like a nurse's station. There was paperwork everywhere, medical charts, scheduling books. That's when we first heard it, a sound like someone moving around in one of the rooms down the hall. We called out, thinking maybe there were other urban explorers or maybe homeless people living in the building. No one answered, but the sounds continued. Amber Reeves: the sounds were deliberate, not like settling noises an old building makes. These were footsteps, doors opening and closing, something that sounded like a metal cart being wheeled across the floor. We probably should have left then, but instead, we decided to investigate. Narrator: the video footage at this point shows the students following the sounds down a corridor. The camera's light illuminates what appears to be a traditional hospital hallway, though the walls seem to be painted a deeper, more institutional green than was visible on other floors. As they move forward, the timestamp on the video suddenly jumps forward 27 minutes, though the students claim they experienced no gap in time. Video analyst Rebecca Torres: the jump in the timestamp is consistent with a camera malfunction rather than deliberate tampering. What's interesting is that when the recording resumes, the lighting conditions and positions of shadows suggest that indeed, very little time had passed, despite what the timestamp indicates. It's as if the time display malfunctioned, but the recording itself was mostly continuous. Narrator: when the footage resumes, the students are in what appears to be a patient room. The room is fully furnished, with a hospital bed that looks occupied, though the figure under the sheets is only partially visible in the frame. The students' voices can be heard, sounding increasingly distressed. Daniel Chen: the room felt wrong. It was cold, way colder than the rest of the building, and there was this smell, like antiseptic mixed with something sickly sweet. The bed looked like it had someone in it, but when Trent pulled back the sheet, there was nothing there. Nothing visible, anyway. But the bed was depressed, like someone was lying there that we couldn't see. Narrator: the footage shows Trent Wilson pulling back the sheet, revealing what appears to be an empty bed. However, as he notes in his statement, the mattress does appear to be depressed in the shape of a human form. As the camera pans across the room, several other anomalies become apparent. A visitor's chair pulled up close to the bed has what looks like a sweater draped over it, though it seems to hover slightly above the chair rather than resting directly on it. A cup on the bedside table appears to be floating approximately half an inch above the surface. Dr. Eleanor Kemp, when they described these things to me, objects that seemed to defy gravity, spaces that showed evidence of occupation by invisible presences, my first thought was group hallucination triggered by environmental factors. Old hospitals can contain hazardous materials, asbestos, lead paint, even certain molds that can cause neurological symptoms, including hallucinations. But that doesn't explain the footage. Narrator, as the students continue to explore Floor S, their footage captures increasingly inexplicable phenomena. In one corridor, the camera shows what appears to be a wheelchair moving independently. In another room, identified as a small laboratory by the equipment visible, glassware and instruments are shown relocating themselves across countertops. Most disturbing, however, is what the students described as the voices. Amber Reeves, at first, it was just whispers, too quiet to make out words, but definitely human voices. As we moved through the floor, they got louder, more distinct. They sounded like normal hospital conversations, doctors discussing patients, nurses giving instructions, but there was no one there. And then we started hearing them talk about us. Narrator, the audio portion of the video, does capture what sound like distant voices. Audio enhancement performed during the investigation revealed fragments of intelligible speech, including what appears to be medical terminology and patient discussions. Most notably, at approximately the 42-minute mark after entering Floor S, a clearly audible voice can be heard saying, "They shouldn't be here. They can see too much." Audio analyst Dr. Michael Patel, I've analyzed this audio extensively, and I can state with professional confidence that these voices were not added in post-production. They were captured in real time by the camera's microphone. What's particularly interesting is the acoustic signature. These voices have the sonic characteristics of sounds produced in the space they were recorded in, complete with the appropriate reverberation and spatial cues. Narrator, the students reported that as they continued to explore, the phenomena intensified, as did their fear. Approximately 1 hour into their exploration of Floor S, the footage shows them attempting to return to the stairwell and exit the floor. This is when they reported becoming lost. Trent Wilson, we tried to retrace our steps back to the red door, but nothing looked familiar. Corridors we'd walked down before led to completely different areas when we tried to go back through them. It was like the floor was rearranging itself. We walked for what felt like hours, trying every path we could find, but we couldn't locate the exit. Narrator, the footage appears to support this claim, showing the students traversing corridors repeatedly, becoming increasingly panicked as they encounter the same areas from different approaches or find familiar landmarks in unexpected locations. Daniel Chun, at some point, I think it was around 2 a.m. according to the camera, though it felt much later, we entered what looked like a large conference room or a lecture hall. That's where we saw them. People. Or something like people. Narrator, the video at this point shows a large room with rows of chairs facing a presentation area. The chairs appear to be occupied, though no distinct human figures are visible. Instead, there are what the students described as distortions in the air, areas where the background seems to warp or blur in roughly human-shaped patterns. Amber Reeves, they were like heat mirages, but in human form. And they were all turned toward us when we entered, like they'd been waiting. That's when the temperature dropped dramatically. We could see our breath, and the voices got much louder. They were saying things like, "Finally here," and "Now they'll understand," and "Show them." I've never been so terrified in my life. Narrator, what happens next on the video has been the subject of intense scrutiny and debate. The camera, held by Daniel Chun, captures a podium area at the front of the room. As the students watch, a figure appears to form behind the podium, not a solid human figure, but a more defined version of the distortions visible in the audience chairs. This figure appears to be wearing what resembles a lab coat. The audio captures a voice, louder and clearer than the others, though with a strange, echoing quality. Voice on recording: "Welcome to Floor S. You are witnessing what remains of Project Threshold. We have been waiting for someone to see us for a very long time. Narrator at this point, the video becomes extremely distorted, with severe visual artifacts and audio disruption. When it stabilizes approximately 40 seconds later, the students are shown running through corridors, their panicked breathing and footsteps the only sounds. They continue running for several minutes until they suddenly encounter the red door they had entered through, now visible at the end of a corridor they claim not to recognize. Detective Sarah Morgan, according to their statements, they had no recollection of how they got from the lecture hall back to the exit door. They remembered running, being chased by what they described as moving shadows, and then suddenly seeing the exit. The gap in their memory aligned with the distortion in the video. Narrator, the footage shows the students practically falling through the door back into the regular stairwell. The timestamp indicates it was approximately 3:20 a.m. According to their statements, they then huddled in the stairwell until daylight, too terrified to either return to floor S or continue their descent through the darkened building. Trent Wilson, we were afraid whatever was on floor S might follow us, so we stayed right by the door until morning. None of us slept. We just sat there, watching the door, jumping at every sound. When the sun started coming through the windows at the end of the hallway, we finally felt safe enough to leave. Narrator, the students exited the building at approximately 6:15 a.m. on Sunday, October 18th, nearly 10 hours after they had entered. They were discovered by authorities shortly thereafter, leading to the investigation that would attempt to make sense of their experience and the footage they had captured. Officer Martin Ramirez, after taking their statements and viewing the footage, we conducted a thorough search of the hospital. We found the stairwell they described and doors for floors 1 through 7, all painted institutional green as they had stated. But there was no red door, no floor S, nothing between floors at all. We checked every stairwell in the building with the same result. Narrator, this discrepancy led to initial skepticism about the student's account. However, the video evidence, while strange and at times distorted, clearly showed them entering a floor with different characteristics than the others, encountering the phenomena they described, and experiencing genuine terror. Dr. Catherine Webb cases like this one at Riverstone Memorial represent what I call architectural anomalies, spaces that appear to exist temporarily or conditionally within established structures. There are numerous accounts across cultures and throughout history of people encountering rooms, corridors, or entire floors that shouldn't exist according to a building's official dimensions or blueprints. What makes the Riverstone case particularly compelling is the video evidence. Narrator, not everyone was convinced by the paranormal explanation. Alternative theories quickly emerged. Dr. Marcus Feldman, abandoned hospitals can be hazardous environments. My examination of the site revealed significant black mold infestations in several areas, including the stairwells. Certain types of mold can produce mycotoxins that, when inhaled, may cause powerful hallucinations. Combined with the power of suggestion and the heightened state of anxiety these students were likely experiencing while exploring a spooky location at night, this could explain their shared experience. Narrator, however, the toxicology reports from the hospital showed no evidence of mycotoxins or other substances that might explain hallucinations. And again, there was the matter of the video footage, which had been examined by multiple experts who found no evidence of digital manipulation. Video analyst Rebecca Torres, could 3 college students in 1998 have created fake footage this convincing? It's highly unlikely. The technology for this kind of visual effects work wasn't readily available to amateurs at that time. And the footage shows consistent anomalies throughout, not just in the obviously strange moments like the lecture hall scene, but subtle details in lighting, reflections, and physical interactions that would be extremely difficult to fake. Narrator, the investigation took an unexpected turn when researchers looking into the history of Riverstone Memorial Hospital discovered a curious gap in the facility's records. Between 1974 and 1977, an entire section of the hospital's operational documents was missing. During the same period, hospital staffing records showed a significant increase in specialized personnel, including several researchers with backgrounds in quantum physics and neuropsychology, unusual additions for a regional medical center. Historian Dr. Laura Simmons, the missing records coincide with a period when Riverstone received a substantial grant from a now-defunct government research initiative called Project Threshold. There's very little public information about this project, but what we've been able to piece together suggests it was involved in some kind of consciousness research. The connection to what the students experienced is circumstantial but intriguing. Narrator further research revealed that in March 1976, the same month shown on the calendar in the students' footage, 3 researchers associated with Project Threshold died under unclear circumstances at Riverstone Memorial. The official cause was listed as exposure to experimental materials, but all related records were subsequently classified. Detective Sarah Morgan, we attempted to obtain more information about Project Threshold through Freedom of Information Act requests, but most of what we received was heavily redacted. What we could determine was that the project was terminated in late 1976 following what was described as a containment failure. Shortly after, Riverstone underwent extensive renovations, including what was termed a structural reconfiguration of several floors. Narrator: the 3 students, Trent, Amber, and Daniel, struggled to return to normal life after their experience. All 3 withdrew from college for the remainder of the semester. Amber Reeves sought psychiatric treatment for post-traumatic stress. Trent Wilson became obsessed with researching Project Threshold, eventually creating a website dedicated to gathering information about similar incidents across the country. Daniel Chin refused to discuss the incident publicly after the initial investigation, though he did provide a final statement before moving out of state. Daniel Chin: people ask if we really saw ghosts that night. I don't think that's the right question. What we saw wasn't dead people, it was something else. It was like seeing through a crack into something happening alongside us, something that's always happening but we can't usually perceive. Floor S exists. It's just not accessible in the way we normally move through space and time. And I think whatever Project Threshold was trying to do, they found a way to exist there permanently. But now I just want to forget. Narrator: Riverstone Memorial Hospital was demolished in December 1998, as originally planned. The demolition crew reported no unusual findings, though the foreman noted that several workers refused to enter certain areas of the building alone, claiming to hear whispers and experience sudden cold spots. The land remained vacant for nearly 15 years before being developed into a retail complex. Employees of the stores built on the former hospital grounds occasionally report odd experiences, electrical disturbances, misplaced items found in impossible locations, and most commonly, the sensation of being watched by someone just out of sight. Store manager Jennifer Lopez: I've worked at the clothing store on the east end of the complex for about 5 years now. We all know the stories about the old hospital, but I never gave them much thought until I started closing up alone. Sometimes, usually around 10 p.m., the lights will flicker in a specific pattern, always the same sequence. And there's one changing room where customers constantly complain about feeling suddenly cold or hearing someone whisper to them when no one else is around. We've had the electrical system checked, the ventilation examined. There's never any explanation. Narrator: the original video captured by the 3 students has never been released in its entirety to the public. In 2010, Trent Wilson announced his intention to publish the complete footage online, along with additional research he had compiled. 3 days before the planned release, his apartment was broken into. The only items taken were his computer and all copies of the original video. Trent Wilson: someone doesn't want this footage seen. I don't know if it's connected to whatever remains of Project Threshold, or if it's government agencies covering up what they were involved in. But I'm not giving up. Too many people have had experiences like ours, encounters with places that shouldn't exist within ordinary buildings. I think whatever was happening on floor S is still happening, just not in a way most people can perceive. But sometimes when conditions are right, the barrier thins and people glimpse what's on the other side. Narrator: as for the area where floor S was allegedly located, the structure that now stands in its place contains offices for a medical billing company. In a curious architectural decision, the building has no 5th floor. The elevator and stairwell labels skip from 4 directly to 6. Architect Raymond Nelson: the numbering was a specific request from the property developer. They cited concerns about Asian customers and tenants who consider the number 5 unlucky in some cultures, similar to how many Western buildings omit a 13th floor. It seemed unusual to me, as this isn't common practice in American buildings, but it wasn't my place to question the client's preferences. Narrator, is there a connection between this unusual numbering decision and the history of the site? The property development company declined to comment for this story. The case of Riverstone Memorial Hospital's forgotten floor remains officially unsolved. The video footage captured by the 3 students continues to circulate in fragments online, fueling debate between those who see it as evidence of paranormal phenomena and those who dismiss it as an elaborate hoax or the product of environmental contamination. For Amber Reeves, who now works as a hospital administrator in another state, the truth is less important than coming to terms with the experience. Amber Reeves, I've had 22 years to think about what happened that night. I've heard all the theories that we were hallucinating, that we faked the whole thing, that we encountered actual ghosts. None of them quite capture what it felt like to be there. What I believe now is that reality is more permeable than we think. There are places where different versions of what is, or what could be, bleed into each other. Floor S was one of those places, and whatever Project Threshold was doing, they found a way to exist in that in-between space. Sometimes I still dream about it, that lecture hall filled with almost visible people, that voice welcoming us. In my dreams, I stay and listen to what they wanted to tell us. Maybe someday I'll find out. Narrator, perhaps some boundaries in our reality are meant to remain unexplored. Perhaps some doors, particularly peculiar red ones found in abandoned hospitals, are better left unopened. Yet as long as such mysteries exist, there will be those drawn to investigate them, to seek what lies beneath the surface of our ordinary understanding. This has been The Forgotten Floor, Episode 3 of Beneath the Surface, a Stories from the Dark production. Join us next time as we explore another case from the shadows of our fictional world, where ordinary places harbor extraordinary stories. The following was a dramatization of events that took place in Westlake County, a place that exists only in our collective imagination. The stories, people, and places depicted are fictional. Any resemblance to real persons, living or dead, or actual events is purely coincidental. This has been Beneath the Surface, a Stories from the Dark production. Remember, sometimes the most terrifying stories are the ones that make us question what we believe to be true. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing to our channel and sharing this with others who appreciate immersive audio experiences. Until next time, I'm your host, inviting you to look beneath the surface of the world around you. Because in the shadows, there are always stories waiting to be told. The stories presented in this podcast are works of fiction. Any resemblance to real people or actual events is entirely coincidental.